Good morning. Good morning. Welcome. Give us a good word. We're going to get started right now. So, good morning, everyone. We are the Civic Lab. We are here to discuss in our session impacting public policy. We're a Black-led do tank. We don't just talk the talk, we walk the walk. We want to accelerate and deepen grassroots democracy, not only locally in Chicago and Illinois, but we're reaching out all over. So check out our different publications. Check out we have great kind of repository of information on everything having to do with having a nonprofit and organizing and advocating for community in our Power Institute. We've got a wonderful book called We Are in Chicago Is Not Broke. Please check out that publication. It's a great, great anthology about the finances of the city of Chicago and what we can do about them. And again, welcome, welcome, welcome. So I am Philip Thomas. I'm here to lead you through this discussion. I'm a recovering philanthropoid. I worked for Chicago Community Trust for many years as a senior program officer and at the Woods Fund of Chicago, both that did extensive grant making in public policy. I have a master's degree in public policy studies from the University of Chicago. I've also worked a lot in both government, nonprofits, different parts of the country, and Illinois, where I'm from. I'm from Illinois, Chicago, South Side, Inglewood, and really excited to share with you some of the insights about how we can get things going in our community around public policy. So my co-trainer today is the founder of the Civic Lab, a guy who is, in the words of Muhammad Ali, a bad man. His name is Tom Tresser. Tom.
Hey, thanks, Phil. Let's do some good trouble, colleagues. We're going to get into some good trouble here. So I'm obsessed with the word power, even more so than I'm obsessed with the word justice. And so the trainings that we're bringing you today and the final training that'll be next week, called Votes, Candidates, and Movements, is kind of the summing up of the Civic Lab's point of view in this work. And that basically it's not enough to study it, and it's not enough even to deliver service to the people, as much as the people need different things that we want to help them with and provide them with our neighbors, our colleagues, our families. So we're asking you to think about the word power, power for justice, and how do we get it? And how do we move the body politic in the way that we want it to go? And so one of the things that we want to be just thinking about is to get out from behind chasing the horses after they left the stable, running after them, right? Oh, with a little rope, try to catch all these horses. So that's what's consuming me in thinking about this, and we hope that you'll enjoy this workshop today. It is our privilege and pleasure to be working with you today. So with that, we can jump right into it.
Absolutely. So let's take a look at the agenda for today so you know what we're doing. We're going to review what we call the 5 M's, and that kind of gives us our framework. We're going to look at the Paul Wellstone way, a great kind of snapshot on progressive organizing and politics. Then we're going to talk about what public policy is and why should we care and why should we worry about lobbying and affecting public policy from the standpoint of running nonprofit organizations. And then we're going to use a quick check, we're going to do an online survey together after we discuss some of these concepts so we can see where everybody's thinking is and then discuss that. And then we're going to talk about lobbying. We're going to do a deep dive on what lobbying is, what is permissible for a nonprofit, what is not permissible. And you'll find through that discussion that nonprofits can have a much bigger role in the formation of public policy than we're currently inhabiting. And that is our Civic Lab position. And I think after today, you'll see that. And then we'll talk about a particular history from Illinois with a guest organizer, very accomplished. And that's going to be really exciting to get some of these concepts and apply them in a real way to what's going on in Illinois. So, and then as we leave, we're going to ask you to fill out the evaluations, which again, allow us to do a kind of a checkup on what we're doing, recalibrate so that we can give you the best possible information for any session that we do after this. So let's get started.
Okay, so we introduced this idea in our last presentation. This is kind of the Civic Lab's big picture view. You know, in physics, they talk about the unified theory of the, you know, relativity and all creation, and the scientists have been puzzling about how to describe, you know, the the physical universe. In the Civic Lab, similarly, we're struggling with trying to present to you a kind of a unified theory of this work. And that's, and you'll see the rows are the layers of the work. What has to come first? And the columns are the levels of the players. And last session, when we talked about Civic Engagement 101, we were over there in the middle under individual. We were talking about individuals' capacities and proclivities and willingness to engage in this work. Today, we're in the center where we're talking about organizations. You all belong to or lead organizations. And you might think of it this way: the individuals are like the atoms, and the organizations are kind of like the molecules, if you follow me. And then next week, we're going to talk about the systems, the whole thing, like the solar system, you know, working together. And in terms of the layers, we say, look, it has to start with the mission. What is our vision? What's our collective vision for change? Where are we going? And that's the start. So a powerful vision, a powerful mission is underneath everything we do. Then comes the message. So what are we saying? Well, how are we communicating that mission? How do we speak about this great vision that we might have collectively for a better Illinois or better America? And then that will determine to whom we speak. Who are we trying to motivate? Our members. That's how we call them, the members. Who should be with us? Who is not with us but ought to be? We just don't know. You know what I mean? And how do we speak to them? What do we say? Where do we say it? Without the message, we can't get members. So if people don't know, how are they informed? How do they hear about this work? And that allows us to collect money and the means to go forward. So it's only a member who's been motivated by a powerful message is going to reach into his or her pocket to give money or to give time. It's just logical. And so finally, it's the momentum. Where's all this thing going? And that's how we think about this work. So we'll come back to it again in the last workshop. We hope that this is going to be landing well with you. The Wellstone Triangle, the Wellstone Way, is another way to think about this work over time. And it's like a cycle. It's like a feedback loop. Some of these things happen at the same time, but they do kind of follow a kind of I would say, a civic logic. So we start in the lower left, the blue triangle, the blue section of growth and outreach. So we're in relationship with our communities. We're engaging. We're doing one-on-ones. We're having meetings. We're listening. to each other and to our constituents. And we're learning from them. What is on their minds? What is bothering our people? What is coming down the pike? Not just in the newspapers, but things that are just around the corner. You know what I mean? But they're coming. They're already here in a way. So we're listening, and that leads us to the red, the advocacy and the issues. Our issues and our advocacy comes out of the experiences of our people. We're not going to advocate for something that no one cares about. That doesn't make any sense. So we're going to advocate for things that are hurting us, that are helping us, hurting us. We either want to get rid of the hurt, or we want to get more of the help. And it's only by listening and studying and reflecting on these things that we're going to be able to understand what makes sense. What's the first thing we should be advocating for? What's the second thing? And then we're going to test it. We're going to go back to our people and go, hey, look, you guys, we heard you say this. So we want to do this thing and that thing. What do you say? Does this make sense to the body? And people are going to go, yeah, I'm with you. Or we don't know what you're talking about. So it's that kind of relationships with our base that propels us around the triangle to green. So now we have issues and that are clear and meaningful. And now is there a bill attached to that? Or are there positions? We want our candidates to speak to those positions. If a candidate is coming before us and our people, and they're not speaking to what we just found out in red and blue, we don't want them. They're not for us. They're not speaking. They're not listening to us. And we're also hoping that people that are part of this process will actually be the candidates. So they're not going to have to be schooled. They're going to be part of the process. They're going to know the issues. And so that's part of what they're going to run on. And then you can see this thing just keeps going around again, because then the candidates become electeds and they have to come before the community again, down in the blue. We got to hold them accountable. So just because, say, Sylvia got elected state representative and she used to run an organization and she used to be our sister right here with us, we got to hold Sylvia accountable. Now that she's state representative, Chavez, she still has to come before us and report. Like, what are you doing, Representative Chavez? Are you down with the policies that we just spoke about over there in the green area? You are? Excellent. We approve. But we have something else for you to do. You see how I'm saying? And now we're back in the red. Okay. So this process, we believe, is very vital. But what we notice is the nonprofit sector is very good in the blue. They love the blue area, and they a little bit in the red, a little bit. That's where we're going to be today. We're going to be in the red area, but they are not at all in the green. Very, 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 very poorly, in our opinion. All right, so that's a little bit of the Wellstone Triangle. And if there's any comments or questions, please unmute or put it in the chat. We'll pause for a moment to let this sink in. It's a very successful way of, we think, of doing grounded, progressive civic work. Okay, if people have other thoughts later on, it's fine to jump in later on. No problem. Okay, the question now is, what is public policy? What is public policy? Anybody?
Just anybody in the chat, or if you want to say it out, what are your ideas? We use that word a lot, but what does it mean to you?
Public equals what? And policy equals what?
I would say that it's, I guess, laws that exist that determine the way resources are distributed, and that ultimately impact communities.
Awesome. Distributed, impacting our communities. Yeah, and laws made by who? That's right. We're talking about laws. So we have we have officials here at the city level. We have the county and the state. The state is really where we're focusing today. So these people are elected by us, including the governor. So the governor would be a major official, of course, and he or she runs the executive side. And the elected officials, like your state reps, are the law writers. They write the law, but they also set the budgets. And this is what Sylvia was talking about. Allocation of resources, meaning our tax dollars, government grants, and other revenues collected by government are then allocated according to priorities. And the priorities, you could say, the priorities of government is expressed in the budget. So, talk is cheap, but we say follow the money. So people can tell you that children are important, right? We hear that all the time, but how is the state committed to child health or prenatal care or kindergarten or things of that nature, or lunches or other things that affect children? So we look at the budgets and the organizations that are doing them, like the public school or the libraries, whatever the case may be. How are they doing? Are they in fact serving the children, or is it just a bunch of show and the kids aren't getting served? That requires us to do some monitoring. We just can't say we're for children and let it go and say, hey, look, they passed another $1 million for the hot lunch program. That's a victory. But did that million actually make it into the mouths of the children, or did it get lost somewhere? So that's what Sylvia was saying is there's a lot there, is basically what we're saying. Okay, so.
And one last thing, I just want to be clear that the laws are one layer of it. And as Tom is saying, so the law set the kind of the big picture of it, the big framework. But then as you drill down to the community or how things are going to be implemented, there are all these kind of different rules from administrative agencies. There's the budget, as he's talking about, that sets the priorities. They all give expression to the broad thing that is a law. I don't know how many of you have looked at a piece of legislation or whatever. Some of them are very long, but they don't actually tell you how to do it. It sets what the rules are from the broad standpoint, but as it gets down to the people and the nitty gritty of what we're going to do, that all has to be worked out. And that is another area of policy and politics and organizing and advocacy.
So we would say, for one definition, that public policy can be defined as a system of laws. So we start with the law, but then we quickly say regulatory measures, courses of action, and funding priorities concerning a given topic created by a governmental agency or its representatives. So if Tom Tresser says that in my house, you have to turn off your cell phone at dinner, that's a Tom Tresser family policy. If Philip Thomas says, in order to get an allowance in my household, all of my children must do chores, that's a Philip Thomas private policy. If my condo association says we don't allow dogs in here, no pets, that's a private policy of my condo. But if the city of Chicago says everyone who's not making $50,000 or less will get a $1,000 check, which is actually being considered, that's a public policy made by the mayor and blessed by the city councilman. And then if they do that policy, they have to decide, well, which division of the government is going to issue that check? Is it the office of the controller? Is it where the check's going to be printed? And where do they get the list of the guys, the families? Where are they going to get that list, and make sure that it's a good list so that they actually distribute the dollars to whom they're going to say it is. So that's kind of what Philip is referencing, that after the law is passed, there's still a lot to go. But basically, this is the definition we'd like to hold out for you. Any questions on that or comments? This is the world we're playing in today, in this space right here. Well, all right. Well, the question then is, so what? I think why does this matter to the Illinois Access to Justice Coalition and to the people on this call? Why is this important?
As we were mentioning before, accountability. So we need to be informed on whether or not public policy is being implemented the way it was designed to. And if not, then we need to act accordingly.
Yeah, and what does that mean to say act accordingly?
Either remove or not vote again for the elected officials or take some kind of other action.
Right. Right. So if not going the way we, and when I say we, it's the collective we, right? It's sort of our collective brains of the people on this call or in the Access to Justice Coalition collectively are communicating with each other. Maybe we have a working group that is reviewing policy and then feeding it back to the members. That's what I say by we, then act accordingly to shift power. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about. What does it mean to act accordingly? Collectively in power. Yes, Claudia says we're working with immigrant communities and need to ensure that the priorities are being reflected in that policy. Yeah, so it's like not in my, if it's in my name, I better be part of it. So if you're going to govern me and take my taxes and rule over me, you better make sure that I'm consulted and that my needs are being represented, that the needs of the community are respected and understood. So that's certainly.
And I would say, to Claudia's point, people in this group are uniquely positioned to do that because they stand at the point of service and dealing with the community, and they can make the best judgments about whether or not what's the current policy works, or if it causes bad effects, or if there's some way to tweak it, or if there are other ways. So you all are really the front line in this process of deciding whether or not these policies should work, be improved, or eliminated.
And it's our position that it really is our responsibility. It really is, regardless of what's in your mission statement and what it is that you're actually doing on a day-to-day basis, whether you're delivering food, helping with legal cases, evictions, homework help, all the things, many things that all these groups are doing every day, every single day. Your phones are jumping off the hook. There's more need out there than there is ability to meet those needs. What we're saying is you still must reserve bandwidth to play in this space, to get out in front of those horses and make sure they go the way you want them to go before they leave the stable. Any other comments or reasons why we should even be bothering with this work? Who cares? Is it going to give us a good payoff if we do invest our time and resources in playing in the policy space?
And what I would remind everyone on this call is the existence of this coalition itself is the result of that kind of work.
Yeah, the Illinois A to J coalition is an example. So is the coalition benefiting you guys? Yes. Coalition is a good thing. You're receiving benefits. Well, that's the result of this kind of work. So you see, it's there's a dollar amount here. I mean, we're talking about millions of dollars going into y'all's pockets for your organization so you can do your work. It could be that people on this call are actually, their salaries are actually being paid for in part by the Illinois Access to Justice Coalition because that they were able to get this line item funding, which wasn't around a few years ago. The need was around a few years ago. But now we are better equipped to help our communities and respond meaningfully because of this policy work. So we think that's a pretty powerful example, and we hope you agree. Now, where is the policy happening that we were looking at? We're talking about one part of the landscape, and that is here in the legislative branch of the Illinois government. Now, there's the executive branch, that would be the governor, the lieutenant governor, and the different kind of commissioners. That is also a place where people try to influence, but we're looking over here in the legislative branch. In the House of Representatives, the State House, and the State Senate. Those are the two bodies that we're looking at. Those are the people that are charged with actually writing the laws, passing on the laws, and then setting the budgets, in concert with the governor. So it's possible the governor has a big plan that he sees for the future of the state, and he gives his plans to the representatives, but they must deliberate. They can pull it apart. They can add things that the governor didn't think about or didn't care to do. They can put things in. They can take things out. They come up with their version, and they pass it, and then they send it back to the governor, and the governor either signs off on it or vetoes part of it, and the process begins again. So it's a dialogue. The future of the state, year by year, is that kind of process. And so your state representatives are very, they're part of the, if you think about building this big block of wall and structure, our legislators are like masons, they're all with bricks, putting the bricks together, building this thing collectively. And so it's very important to know who your legislators are and see, are they good masons for you? Are they laying good stones for you? Are they in accord with you, with your wishes and your dreams? So that's what we're playing over there in the upper left. Now, the way that is commonly thought about influencing these people is called lobbying. And it's a word that comes from the early days of when people would meet in the lobby of the State House or the U.S. Capitol. Actually, there was the lobby before you went into the chamber, and that's where everybody was meeting, to influence each other before the legislators actually went in and cast a vote. So this term lobbying is sort of the one that we're stuck with and we're talking about. And so we're focusing on the state laws and the budgets, and then the people that are appointed and approved to run departments and their programs. And so the question is, how do we know if we look at any of this stuff? How do you know? Diego, let me call on Diego. How do you know, Diego, if you like the policies that have been passed?
I would probably say it would depend on the way that it's affecting me. If I'm looking at it on a personal level, if I'm looking at it from a professional standpoint and the kind of work that I do, then I would have to see how it's affecting the community, the groups that I serve, and if it's favorable to them.
Right. Right. So that implies that you know your community, that you know their situation. Are there many people who need housing assistance? Are there many younger people in the community? Are there many people who English is not their first language? Is there a new factory that just opened up? There was a lot of employment, or no, the factory just closed. It's the other way. There's people just thrown out of work. Are people, there's no parks, so the kids have no place to play. Whatever the story is, that means that you know about your community and are listening to them you're in that blue section of the triangle that we've talked about. You're listening. There's ways for you to know. Anybody want to add anything to that? How do you know if a policy is going to be good or bad? Well, what about this? Do you know about a similar policy done somewhere else? So it could be that it was a severe winter and some people need assistance with their heating bills. The bills were too high. And someone says, well, you know what? I used to live in Philadelphia, and they have a pretty interesting program that when the temperature goes below 40 degrees for whatever, then people can apply and get assistance in their heating bills. Oh, that's pretty cool. Let's learn about that program and maybe we could bring it here. So another thing that's helpful is to be aware of good policies from other places that you can use as models for Illinois or for your community. So that means you've got to be up on stuff, that you have a way of knowing, either by networking with your colleagues in other cities or reading the press, or maybe there's a trade magazine for your work. Or say if you're a social worker, the National Association of Social Workers has a newsletter and has convening. So maybe you attend or network with your peers in the social work field from other states, and they're telling you, hey, this thing that just happened in Boston, it's amazing. It's a mentoring program for teenagers that and you go, okay, I'm just gonna file that away. And I'll keep that in mind. If it's particularly interesting to me, I might actually go do a little research on it. Okay, all right. So now we're ready to do this thing, Phil.
All right. So I've just put into a link into the chat. We want to determine, is your organization ready to advocate? So kind of what are your organizational muscles around advocating? So we have an assessment, quick power check that is based on a tool by the Boulder Advocacy. So we want you to click on that link. You're going to pick the best response for each question. And we want you to keep track of your total score. We're not compiling or tabulating anything, but we want you to do a self kind of check about your organization's ability to do this. And so the score for each response is indicated next to the response number. For example, if you answer very strong or always for all 5 questions, then your total score would be 20. So we want the scores and then the each of the ones and then what your total score is. So we're going to give you a few minutes to go into that, do your scores, and we're going to come back and talk about the scores. If you have any problem with the figuring something out, just let us know. Put something into the chat. We're going to take 5 minutes to do this. So, Rosalia, we are in the midst of an exercise where we're doing a survey for the next few minutes. I don't know if you can see that. I'm going to put the link back in there. But please just take a few minutes to fill out this survey based on what you know about your organization's abilities and muscles around lobbying and public policy. We're just going to take a few more and put it back in there and make sure that. Oh, Tom did it too, so. So please remember to record your answers for us so that we can talk about it. Okay, Tom, so that should be about 5 minutes.
Yeah. We've had 6 groups that do this. Okay, cool.
All right. So if you're still doing it, please finish up. But we're going to start doing some reporting back. So please put your individual scores, but definitely your total score. So let's go down this list then. Commitment to organizing. So does your staff or board understand the basic elements for organizing? Do they have a solid picture of policy context? Do you have a strong constituency base? Is there a solid understanding of advocacy rules and dedicated staff to advocacy and organizing, which is very important? So let us know where you rated on that. Are you very strong, moderately strong, somewhat strong, and not strong at all? And just put your score down in the chat, just the number, a 4, 3, 2, or a 1. Next session is empowerment. The organization has a defined process for developing and tracking, organizing, and advocacy skills. The constituents have a major role in moving that organizing and policy work forward, both in its formulation and its implementation. So how do you all do on that? Is it very strong, a 4? Is it moderately strong? Is it somewhat strong? Sometimes it's episodic, and not strong, rarely ever. That's a 1. So 4, 3, 2, or 1. Just put your number in the chat. Organizing your organization as an annual strategic plan, organizing and policy. It includes research, power mapping, and identifying the targets for campaigns. Is that strong, moderately strong, somewhat strong, or not strong at all? So what's your numeric thing? Just stick it in the chat. And then consensus building. Your organization has an annual plan for engaging with the constituents. And this could be asset mapping, we talked about in other contexts, public forums, surveys, focus groups, planning sessions. These are these kind of community outreach based information gathering. Is that strong in your organization? Is it moderately strong? Is it intermediate, somewhat strong, or not strong at all? 4, 3, 2, 1. Give us your assessment, just on based on what you know. And the last part is infrastructure. Your board. It has a policy advocacy committee that is effective. It interfaces with the staff. It's dedicated to moving, organizing, and policy work forward, and it's resourced adequately to do that. So where does your organization stand on that? It's very strong, moderately strong, somewhat strong, or not strong at all? Just give us your assessment. And then add those scores up. Where are you in your total score? Because that'd be very enlightening to see that.
Well, people are posting. We have a range from the low side to the high side. So let's start with someone who posted a high score.
We got Netza, they have a 16.
Yeah, Netza, you want to tell us what's going on with you? You got a great score here.
Well, just because I pretty much answered what the questions were.
So this is an important part of your organization, the binational.
Correct.
Has that always been so, or is that something that you've evolved into, or did you really start from that? And
No. We have developed through the years.
So you saw the necessity for this.
Correct. And the board members.
Great. And
That's legal.
Sylvia, you gave yourself a low mark. Can you talk about that if you wouldn't mind?
Sure. Well, it was eye-opening for sure. Some of the words, particularly when it comes to board and constituent engagement, I don't believe that we do a lot of that within the agency, and even like annual plans and strategic plans, that's not something that we do specifically for policy. We've tried having forums regarding certain issues and topics in the past, but there hasn't been that sustainability. So it hasn't really been that successful.
So it's not in your culture to the extent that it would show up that way.
Right.
But
Cool.
I take it you see the utility of that.
Definitely.
Yeah. Okay, this is good. This is just sort of a little pulse taking, a
Yeah,
little
it is very
sharing
helpful.
to see where we are collectively. And this is encouraging to maybe some groups might reach out to Netza and say, like, well, how did it happen? How, talk to us a little bit about that. And you might do back channels or offline and just do some sharing, executive director to executive directors about what happened inside the binational organization to make that change and make it so important. And and do they put some money behind it or what? Many other questions you might be asking one another. Okay, well, this sets us up to now get into the discussion of the kinds of advocacy that nonprofits engage in. So there are three kinds of advocacy, generally speaking. We talk about nonpartisan and non-lobbying. So these are issue advocacy kinds of things, voter registration and other measures. Then there's lobbying. You're trying to influence the outcome of a piece of legislation. You're trying to get a yes vote or a no vote, very specific. And then there's partisan activities in which you are trying to support a particular candidate or defeat another candidate. Those are the three broad kinds of advocacies that one can engage in. Now, these are the kinds of things that our organizations, which are 501c3. Now, that's the designation of the IRS tax code. So every organization on this call, and I dare say every organization in the coalition, is a 501c3. And everything in the green on this chart is permitted and encouraged. And I would say probably very little of it is actually being done by our organizations. So there's no issue whatsoever if your organization engages in any of these activities that's in the green with the green light. If you are doing lobbying, that is to say you are trying to influence a piece of legislation, that is also permitted, but with some caution. What is absolutely not permitted is endorsing a candidate. That is to say, Sylvia Chavez, as the executive of her organization, goes on the television or writes a letter saying, I support Tom Trusser for mayor, and it's on the letterhead of my organization, and the organization paid for the mailing and that sort of thing. No, that is not permitted. Now, Sylvia, after 5 o'clock, or really probably after 9 o'clock when she really leaves her office, Sylvia can come to my campaign and say, Tom Trusser, I endorse you. And you are my potential alderman. I live in your ward and I want to work for you. I happen to be the executive director of this organization, but I'm here tonight as a private person. That is fine. That's still okay. Okay. It also means that our organizations can't, like, say, give the mailing list of our organizations to some campaign. That is not permitted. Okay. All right. Clear.
So,
Lots that we can do.
Tom, so given that we're looking at a screen where most of it we can actually do,
Yes.
but we've talked to the groups and it's not in their cultures generally. Some groups, yes or no. And I'm kind of interested to know why people think that's going on in their organization. Do people think that this will affect their 501c3 status? So it's a kind of caution thing. They don't want to upset their status as a 501c3, or is it more that the necessity of it isn't generally understood or communicated inside? I'm just wondering if someone from the group could respond to why they think they don't do more of it.
Yeah, great question.
I think for Spanish Community Center, it's been an issue of priorities. We've focused even internally and with the board on growing the agency and providing more direct services. That advocacy, because unfortunately, has gone to the sidelines.
So it's a capacity thing, given the circumstances, the real critical needs, and the need to allocate resources to the service provision, which is your main mission.
Right.
So if that's true for you, raise your hand in the chat, or put same for me in chat. Let's get some kind of poll here.
Yeah, I want to understand, because this is the very important part of what we're talking about.
Is what Sylvia said true for your organization? It's not that you don't know about this work. It's just, it's not a priority because there's pressing needs. Raise your hand. Yeah, Claudia says the same for her. Same. Claudia. Right. How about the other people? Well, it'll be our theory. It's our theory until you tell us otherwise, that is true for the entire nonprofit sector. But I will just go ahead and boldly state that, because we've heard this many, many times. It's totally understandable.
Yes, it is.
The need for your work, your collective work, is going exponentially. It's not as if there's less,
That's right.
for you all to handle. The question is, what's the smart play over the long term? This is a question not just for the Illinois Access to Justice. This is a question for all nonprofits in America right now. What is the best use of our collective resources and our collective power? Is it chasing those horses after they left the stable and I'm running after them with a little bitty rope? Or do I control my stable and I decide where the horses go, and if they're horses or cows or chickens or whatever, if you want to follow that metaphor? Yeah, that's a question for us as leaders. It's for the Civic Lab, the #1 question facing us in America today.
Absolutely. Is there a better way?
Yeah, and we're just
Can
gonna
we stop putting Band-Aids on things and get to the root causes?
We're just gonna put it out there. Band-Aids versus solving the problem, whatever the problem is. And again, we're going to return to this question. It is a vexing question in our last session together when we talk about votes, candidates, and movements. And I think it's probably, we're giving away the punchline to tell you that for us, the solution is in the movement building, backed up by candidates who look like you, who change the ground rules and start to manage those horses before they start running away again, because they're always running away. Okay. This is another way to say the same thing that we just said. Our organizations are tax exempt, but also people who give money to us may deduct. That is a privilege owed to us if you're a 501c3. Our lobbying activities are limited, but they're not zero, and we cannot support or endorse candidates. Now, 501c4s and other types of organizations, including labor unions, they are also tax exempt, but if you give them money, you may not deduct it. Their lobbying activities are unlimited, and their political work is present but not major. Then you've heard of 527s or PACs, political action committees. They too are tax exempt. Again, if you give to them, you do not get to deduct. They may do some lobbying, but their main activity, these 527s, is all about endorsing candidates and supporting campaigns. That's all they do, pretty much. So those are the way that we fit into this work as us. We're over there on the left, under where it says United Way. That's kind of where we stand.
And so if you look at that, Tom, that thing about that chart, to me, again, makes the point that our organizations actually are very powerful in this space if you exclude the idea of endorsing a particular candidate. We actually have more latitude and more incentive because it's tax deductible contributions than the other parts of that code.
Right. We're gonna make that point again shortly. Basically, that we're leaving a lot of power on the table. That's how I understand what Phil just said, and I think you'll agree with us by the time we're done with this session today. We're going to talk about a ballot measure shortly, and what's not lobbying is all that stuff over there in the blue. all kinds of things that we can do to help people understand, our constituents, our people, some of these large issues that come before them when an issue appears on the ballot that is a big friggin' deal. We can do a lot to help our people figure it out. Is this particular ballot a good thing? You know, what's it going to do? How's it going to impact us? You know, you can tell that story powerfully. And then when you actually tell your people to vote yes or no on it, then you're over there on the right side, on the lobbying. And again, there's a lot that we can even do on that as well. That is still permitted. And again, this is still another way to say the same thing. The 501c3s, of which we're all members, we can't electioneer. I can't say vote for Phil Thomas for mayor. I can say we should be behind Senate Bill 7, which will increase Head Start in Illinois. I can say that. And I can do unlimited amount about explaining what Head Start is. I can send out an email every hour explaining what Head Start is, how Head Start helps children's health, what happens when children don't have early education, or the benefits of a state that had Head Start 100%, how crime went down. I can do that till the cows come home. And I encourage us to think more about that work. There's a great organization called Boulder Advocacy that is standing ready to advise you. And this guy right here, Victor Rivera, is available with materials in Spanish. And he's happy to consult with anybody is wondering about something that you're thinking about. You call that number and someone will actually assist you. And if you call Victor or email him, his email is in chat. They have a lot of these materials in Spanish. So these different charts, these different handouts, and also on their website at Boulder Advocacy. So it's a huge, awesome resource that is available to all of us. And you should all be very familiar with this organization. And I encourage you to visit their website and just trowel around. They've got PowerPoints from other presentations they've done. It's just an amazing, amazing resource. Okay, back to you, Phil, to talk about this thing called lobbying.
Well, if you weren't convinced by what we said so far, look at this chart. Now, this is the total lobbying spent in the U.S. from 1998 to 2021. $82 million on federal. This is like, we're looking at a federal picture. 130 lobbyists representing the biggest financial brokers in our country. And so if you look at that, the private sector, this is they're in this game that we're not in, big time. So if the private sector is doing this and all of this money is being spent, and it's these corporations and all this stuff that are doing it in their interest, who's actually paying for it? Who's actually paying for the lobbying they're doing? It's us, it's the consumers, it's the ones downstream. Part of when we buy a bag of chips or get that at the gas pump or whatever, we're sponsoring private organizations' lobbying efforts, but the money rolls down to us. The price tag rolls down to us. So I want you to consider that not only are we not in this game, but we're getting smacked around pretty good and helping get ourselves to get smacked around. So here's the percentage of nonprofits that reported lobbying activities. Not even 3%, just under 3%. So we're using only a tiny bit of our capacity while the opposition is going at it hard. So just to give you that context again, we believe at the Civic Lab that we've got to get in this game and we've got to turn that around. So if your organization, based on that survey before, is one of the ones that doesn't have a lot of it. We don't want you to feel bad because you're not alone. You're actually typical. And we believe that if we change that around, we will change policy and we will change the course of our communities. So next slide.
Yeah, we were going to take a break, but I think we got to move on.
Yeah, we got to move on. So now we're gonna, has anybody heard about the Illinois fair tax campaign that was going on? Just if you could just say yes, I've heard about the Illinois fair tax campaign, just in the chat, yes or no. We're really curious about this question. We got yeses, yeses. So we do have an extraordinarily astute group. Yes, yes, yes. Okay. So what this was about was a graduated income tax amendment. And it was a proposed amendment to the Illinois Constitution. It's a big deal because it's hard to do. It's rarely, there's a lot of steps to changing the Illinois Constitution, as there should be. You shouldn't be able to easily change the Constitution because then you wouldn't have something stable. So you need 60% of the vote to change that, to change the actual Constitution. But the advocates of this really thought that this is what we need to change the structural deficit of what's going on in Illinois politics. So does anybody know the difference between a regressive and a progressive tax? Yes, go ahead. Anyone? Well, essentially, regressive taxation is what we have. And that is where tax rates are flat or similar. And so that poor and middle class pay the same kind of rate or similar rates as people who make much more money.
Join the meeting.
A progressive tax, income tax, changes the rate based on the ability to pay of the taxpayer. So what's often spun as by people who don't like progressive taxation is the idea that making rich people pay more is unfair. But we're talking about a rate so that the impact on a person of limited means, it has a different impact on them because they have less money. So if a millionaire, if I've got a net worth of $1 million and my tax rate is 10%, yes, I pay $100,000. The person that makes $100,000 and it's 10% of him, that is $10,000. So you could say the rich guy's getting screwed, but as you go down in income, that person with $10,000, if he pays 10%, he's paying $1,000. And that at that level has a much bigger impact on their life, that $1,000, than that $100,000 of a millionaire or that $10,000 of a person that makes $100,000. So in a nutshell, that's what this is about. Tom, you want to cue up our guest?
Sure. So here's some propaganda that came out for and against the campaign. The image on the left is from a public sector union. The image on the right is from a campaign, a video campaign, an ad campaign from a group opposing the amendment. And notice they call themselves the Coalition to Stop the Proposed Tax Hike. And the people pushing the amendment were calling it the Fair Tax Amendment.
So that's a very clever way of doing what we were just discussing, where the people who actually benefit of a unfair tax system because spin the change of that tax system as unfair to them, as unfair to everyone because they're actually hiking taxes.
And the number one person who funded that campaign against the Fair Tax Amendment was a guy named Ken Griffith, who operates a hedge fund. He is Illinois' richest man. With he donated over about $54 million to defeat the campaign or to work against it. And he just bought the most expensive home in America. He spent $238 million to buy a house in New York City.
Well, apparently that's affordable housing.
For him.
At least for him.
And
at the end of the day, the measure to change our taxes here in Illinois failed. It only got 47%. And it only carried 2 counties, Cook County and Champaign.
So to help us understand what happened, we now we'll call on our special guest who's graciously agreed to join us and share his experiences. This is Tex Paisley. He's an attorney and a member of the Jewish Council on Urban Affairs and also active in this fair tax campaign and the Active Transportation Alliance. His attorney represents plaintiffs and whistleblowers in class actions, civil rights, and consumer action cases. He was a Powell Fellow in Legal Services at the Shriver Center on Poverty Law and a Robert F. Kennedy Fellow and staff attorney at the No Exceptions Prison Collective in Knoxville. Welcome, Tex Paisley.
Hi, thanks for having me. Yeah, I really appreciate everyone for being here, and I'm really, honored to speak today about the Fair Tax Campaign. So to start, I'll just talk a little bit about how I got involved in the campaign and the Jewish Council on Urban Affairs, which folks on this call may be familiar with, but just in case. The Jewish Council on Urban Affairs was founded during the Civil Rights era in the 1960s by a rabbi named Robert Marks, who was very active in the Civil Rights movement. And if you're familiar with the history of the Contract Buyers League, which worked on the west and the south sides to protest against this really predatory practice of what was called contract buying against almost entirely Black homeowners. JCUA was really founded out of those movements, and its model is it's a Jewish organization for people who are active Jews who are in the Jewish faith, and predominantly, so anyone can sign up to be a member, and which I am. So I pay yearly dues, annual dues to be a member of the organization. And as a member, I get to decide what the organization works on. So there's a few, it's organized by a committee structure. So there's paid organizers who run committees. So for example, there's a committee that's been working on police accountability that was very active in the campaign to get what is now known as the Empowering Communities for Public Safety Ordinance, or ECPS ordinance, passed in the city of Chicago. And JCUA works through Jewish congregations, which are concentrated both in the city of Chicago, but also in the suburbs as well. So places like Skokie or Highland Park, where there's a very large Jewish population. And so that's kind of how it works. It's built around the organizing model of similar to Saul Alinsky, who is a very some say is kind of the founder of community organizing, and where they pick an issue and try to win a campaign based on that issue. And so with the Fair Tax Campaign, this was a very long fought effort that JCUA was only one of many organizations involved in it. And so we were kind of under the umbrella of something called the Vote Yes for Fair Tax Campaign. which I believe that's what it was called, but there were many other organizations involved in there. And I personally, as a member of JCUA, I found this really important because I believe deeply in funding government and funding the services it can provide, and doing so in an equitable manner. And to me, the flat tax structure, the regressive tax structure that Philip was describing is, just to me, deeply inequitable, because it means for the first $100 someone makes, they're paying the same rate of tax as Ken Griffin is on the first, or on the $50 millionth that he makes in that year. And that's just not right, and that's not how your federal taxes are paid. So if you look at the tax brackets, you hardly pay anything as you go up the ladder, but as you go up further and further, we're saying, like, good for you if you made $1 million this year, but you didn't do that yourself, and you should pitch in. Like, you don't need that money, and you can provide those services back to benefit everyone. And so that's what we wanted to do in Illinois. And the big thing holding us back is that there's a provision in the Constitution that prohibits any progressive tax structure. So it requires a flat tax. So the whole effort here was to amend the Constitution, as was said. And so, practically, this, as I mentioned, this has been going on for years. J.B. Pritzker was involved in funding much of the campaign for the Fair Tax Amendment. And once it was, so the legislature had to vote to get the question on the ballot for the 2020 election. So once the Illinois legislature did that, that's when the campaign kicked into gear into this public-facing outreach campaign, because everyone was going to go to the polls and vote. They're going to vote for president, they're going to vote for Congress, and they're going to vote for the Fair Tax Amendment. And so, I think a big component of it was just outreach and education to kind of get in front of people and tell them what this was. Because, I love this stuff, but I know that most people, when you start talking about taxes, they lose interest. And, so I think a big thing is just to get out there and say, like, hey, this is what's going on. Be looking for this on the ballot, start thinking about it. And here's why this makes sense. And, we showed them charts, or, if we didn't show them, if we talked to someone on the phone, we explained, like, hey, look, almost everyone in Illinois is going to benefit from this, materially is going to benefit from this amendment in terms of what comes home at the end of the day. 97% of people are not going to see any change, or actually going to pay less in state income taxes. But it's going to raise $4 billion for the state to provide services. And so that's, like, that's the core of the campaign, is that's a good deal, and that's something that's good for everyone. And it reduces property tax burden, it reduces sales tax burden, these other taxes that we use to fund services. If we can fund that by just a modest increase on people making six figures, or making millions of dollars a year in what they're paying, that makes sense. So that was really the message, I think. And through JCUA, our initial outreach was working through our existing community. So we were kind of one pillar of the Vote Yes for Fair Tax campaign. So an organization like Latino Policy Forum, for instance, was working within its community, within its networks, to get the message out there. And then at JCUA, we were working with our existing networks. And so before the pandemic, we were able to present 2 congregations, go to meetings to tell people about it. But obviously, the COVID pandemic changed things, and we really had to rely on phone banking as our primary outreach mechanism. And so I spent much of 2020, starting really in the winter, the spring of 2020, doing phone banks through JCUA maybe once a week. And we had pre-existing lists where we were working in kind of a subset of communities where we knew there was a strong Jewish presence. So on the north side in Hyde Park, in Skokie, And we would call those phone bank lists and, just tell people, have a very educational message. Because most people aren't thinking 6 months out, what's going to be on the ballot when I vote. So just kind of get it out there and really get it front and center. Like, here's what's going on. Here's why this is a good deal, why it makes sense, and why it's good for the state. And then kind of, I would say September, October, as the election got closer, we sort of joined forces with the full campaign, and we did much more frequent phone banking and more frequent in both kind of different messaging in terms of our phone banking, and just expanded our reach to statewide. So we were working on phone banking lists where previously I was calling people maybe primarily on the north side of Chicago, and then I started talking to people who lived in Decatur, Illinois or something. And so really getting the message out there. While this was going on, I was not part of this, but the other thing that was happening was a lot of spending on TV ad campaigns and, kind of big budget agenda setting. And I'll talk a bit and, kind of do a post-mortem and why, what we might have done differently or done better in relation to that. But so that was kind of the final push was really, and again, the pandemic was still going. And I think people were justifiably concerned about not doing door-to-door knocking or doing in-person events. So we really pushed the phone banking. We worked with supportive state legislators who, would join us on these calls and, try to get people involved as much as possible and, make it as much as you could over a Zoom call, make it a fun thing for people to do and try to be supportive and encouraging. And then when early voting started, we would go out to voting sites with flyers. I live in Uptown in Chicago, so I would go to Truman College early voting site and, pass out flyers and just talk to people on the way in the door and try to get the message out there. As was mentioned, I think we always knew it would be an uphill battle because getting 60% of people to vote on anything, I think that's about what Joe Biden got in the state of Illinois. It was about 60%. Don't quote me on that, but I think it was around there. And so Illinois is a blue state, but it's not, that blue. And so even if everyone who voted for Joe Biden voted for the fair tax, you would still be kind of right at that cusp. So it was an uphill battle. But I think really, to me, if looking back on it and thinking kind of through what hindered us, number one was King Griffin had a lot of money and he spent it to just put out he basically lied to people, and he was able to just use mass media in his money to get those lies in people's heads. And it became very, very hard to get those messages out of people's heads. So to give you a concrete example, in Illinois right now, you do not pay state income tax on any retirement income. So if you get a Social Security or get a pension, that income is exempt from the state income tax. If the fair tax passed, that would be the same. That money would be exempt. But King Griffin ran ads literally showing it would have a senior citizen saying, if this tax hike passes, my retirement income is going to be taxed. And no one policed him on that. No one policed this organization on that. So that ad runs, and then I call someone on the phone saying, hey, have you heard about this fair tax amendment? And they said, yeah, my Social Security is going to be taxed. And I have to be someone they don't know, they've never met me. I'm in Chicago, they're in Springfield, they're in no position to trust me. And I have to convince them, and I have to say, like, no, that's not the case. And that really it puts you on your heels, and it makes it hard, especially I think when there's not that in-person contact or that trust there to kind of get that out of people's heads. So I think, I don't want to only blame King Griffin, but I think it's really, do want to emphasize that the money he put into it and the propaganda that he spewed with that money was really, really harmful. I would say another hard thing that would made a real uphill battle is the other big messaging from the opposition was to tie everything to Mike Madigan into corrupt Democrats in the state legislature, and which, again, was harmful. And I think, I noticed a real tone shift once we got closer to the end of the campaign and started talking to people outside of Chicago, is, people who weren't as naturally Democratic or as naturally liberal leaning really were not trustful, because what they were trying to say is that you're giving, by removing this flat tax provision from the Constitution, you're giving the power of the tax hiking corrupt Democrats in Springfield, Mike Madigan and his cronies, to do whatever they want and just take more of your money. In taxes, I don't need to tell anyone on here, Illinois is a high tax state. In our property taxes in Chicago and elsewhere are high. We have high sales taxes, but those are really inequitable, and they really fall hardest on low-income communities who can't afford to pay that. But it's hard on the phone, and it's true downstate too. Cities with stagnant populations that aren't growing, with large pensions to fund or something, Peoria or Springfield face the same problem. So it's not just a Chicago issue, but it's really hard when you kind of have that, people are feeling that material difficulty, and then they're seeing Mike Madigan in the newspaper tied to this federal corruption investigation. And then his image is on this tax hike, vote against the tax hike amendment TV ad. When I'm calling them, telling them, hey, here's something good that's going to get more money to the state and make it distributed more equitably, it's really hard to kind of talk past all those other layers, I think. And I found that difficult. And to me, and I don't want to take up too much time, but I guess to me, the messaging part was really hard. And then it was very difficult, I think, to build trust. Kind of the final thing that I saw, that I really experienced is the difficulty in building trust across these kind of partisan divides. Where if I'm calling someone from Chicago to someone in Southern Illinois, I legitimately, and I still believe, there's a message that we have that makes sense to people, that is going to improve their lives materially. But we just didn't have, I wasn't in a position on the phone, given kind of the context of the media environment and the presidential election, it's really hard to kind of make that material case and kind of get past all those partisan layers.
So Tex, this is so awesome, brother, that you have laid this out for us. I am so grateful for you to come on here and explain this to us, because what you just said is at the heart of our teaching today. The trust that you just didn't have, as you said, a cold caller from nowhere, from beyond the blue, to this voter in Peoria or Rockford or wherever you were calling. The nonprofit organizations that litter the state all over, that are serving the people every single day, that are in a relationship to that very person that you were talking to. Can you help us understand how the trust would work if the message didn't come from a cold caller, but if it came from someone closer to home?
I think it would be, it'd be completely different. And really, it was, I could see the contrast just as I described the shift. With JCUA, when we're doing the calls within our network, a lot of people knew of JCUA. So I could say, I'm calling from JCUA, I'm here to talk to you about fair tax. They're like, oh, I've heard of you. I know that, and you have that, even if they're not a JCUA member, they're familiar with it, and it's in their community. And, and then, but if I'm calling, I'm calling from Chicago on behalf of the Vote Yes for Fair Tax campaign to, Joe Voter in Quincy, Illinois. That's not there. And I'm not saying that the effort was wasted. I think I had great conversations with people, and I think we maybe shifted some people, and I definitely, got people on the phone to think about things differently, at least.
Right, but as you say,
yeah.
the shorthand of the relationships and the trust factor means a lot in these kinds of calls when one side has overwhelming advantage in reaching the customer. So that's a very important point to make, folks, that the relationships that we've built up with our people, our constituents, that this is the time to cash in on it, to make structural change that will better the state and improve your abilities to serve your people and the lives of our constituents. That's the time to go to war. Well, listen, so the governor's up for re-election, so maybe he'll get reelected, and this is still an important issue for the governor. So let's speculate that Mr. Pritzker is reelected and that he decides to go again, maybe for the 2024 season, right? Would you have some advice collectively for us if that should happen?
Yeah, I think one thing is just the messaging of just like being out there out front and getting it in people's, and I think, like say what you will about JB Pritzker, he put a lot of money behind the campaign and put a lot of advertising behind it. And if you're up against King Griffin, you need that. That's like an important part. It's like you need the money, and you need people watch TV and they get those messages in their head. So I think, and I don't know how, if it's fresh in people's minds, I don't know how you get around it, but kind of, get it out, because I think really like the case is on our side, the facts are on our side. So it's getting that information in people's heads, both through the message, but I think also it has to be this trust thing, and it has to be whatever strategy it is, it needs to be a statewide strategy to really identify in every part, everywhere, because turnout's great and getting people. Chicago was behind the fair tax, but even places like DuPage County that I think voted for Joe Biden voted against the fair tax. And it's not that far even to get out there. And if you just even did the work in the collar counties to identify, who are people we can trust, or who are those people who are voting for Joe Biden but aren't voting against the fair tax. Like, who are those people who, believe in this agenda of fairness, theoretically want a president who's supporting a progressive pro-government agenda at the federal level, but aren't going to vote for this basic thing to get those policies implemented in the state. Like, who are those people? What churches do they go to? What are their organizations to really build that trust? So because Ken Griffin will run those ads again.
Sure.
But if you have the person there who can say, hey, that's a lie.
Right.
Your Social Security is not going to be taxed. This is good for you. Like, that's really important.
So that implies that somebody should be getting ready. So some coalition of coalitions, I'm not sure who's supposed to lead that, but they should be on that case right now. They should have already identified the things that you're speaking of and be already thinking about, well, let's create a county by county infrastructure, and let's identify the top 100 churches, just to take your example, and let's get their pastors, their phone numbers, and let's get congregants. Let's do that work now, so that should this thing come around again, we'll beat Ken Griffin to the punch. We'll be there first, and still it'll be a battle for people's minds. They're going to have to decide at the end of the day: do I believe Rabbi Jones or Ms. Chavez from the food pantry, who's just put this information in my hand, or do I believe the billionaire who just bought another house for $400 million, whatever, on Mars? Let's get to any questions or comments for our guests, folks. This is a rare opportunity. Please, if you have questions for text, please unmute and just go ahead and ask them. I cannot see the chat in the way we got the screen set up. So please unmute and ask our guests anything you'd like about this work.
I think for us at NIJ Fund, so we did engage particularly with the Illinois Coalition of Immigrant and Refugee Rights. And for us, it was a hard question on how we would engage because, if we go back to what we did earlier, right? I scored us at a 13, and I think that's a high number for us. I think that, maybe we kind of hover around a 10, right? A 9 or a 10. But when issues like this come along, right, and we see the amount of opportunity that we have within our network, right? We work with a network that is, not only an immigrant community base, but also a non-immigrant community base that is very interested in supporting and moving along, right? Not only the services, but the issue work, right? But we have to be very careful. We also notice that we have to be very careful in how we present things and how we, how this is very transparent, right? I mean, a lot of the things that you talked about were very key to how we had to, present the work because, we got some responses from some of our constituents, right, that donate to us, that have been with us for years with the organization, where they questioned, what this policy would do, right? And they were like, literally like, well, how do you know that this is going to, that this is not going to affect this? And, and for me, I think it was totally a transformative experience because many times, you have folks, that are willing to help and willing to give their time and resources, but they count on you, right, to be able to really fully explain. So us like immersing ourselves and having this partnership, right, in coalition with ICER was very, I think, instrumental to how we then gave that information to our constituents, right, and saw them as partners, like, hey, like this is what it is, and this is why, it's important to us. Is it important to you, right? And it was hard. I'm not going to say that it was easy. It was really hard. And, and now, now we're working on the earned income credit, right? And you get things like, but people are going to pay but immigrants are still going to pay their taxes, right? It's like, okay, let me explain to you that immigrants have been paying their taxes for years and years and years and have not been given a cent back, right? So it's like that kind of education. And really taking a step back, right? And not feeling some way or another, right? Because folks don't understand this, but really taking a step back and really, really taking this for what it is an opportunity to educate and to be able to, to give people the tools to make their own decision at the end of the day, right?
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, I think that's really, because taxes they're not that complicated, but I think people can make them complicated to try to deceive you, as to like, you can move some numbers around and make something seem one way when really it's not going to have that impact. And yeah, I mean, that's a great point. Is it really, yeah, I mean, it really is about education in getting, and I think what I like really internalize from talking to a lot of people about it is it's really like people, everyone has kind of pre-existing biases or pre-existing feelings about like they're a small business owner and they just feel this way about taxes, and you kind of have to work from that level, and really like hear their concerns, because at the end of the day, it is important to people like that they can meet their material needs. And I think you have to keep that front and center. But no, I think that's a really, yeah, like I really appreciate those comments. And
what I'm hearing there from both your remarks is there's a need for ongoing financial literacy as part of what we do with our nonprofit constituents. In other words, if you're coming to my organization to get literacy counseling or rent assistance or homework help, we're going to ask you to do a few things. We're going to ask you to register to vote if you're able to vote. And we're going to ask you to be aware of these issues about taxes and the way government works, because we may not be here to serve you if the government goes the way it is. So So we're not going to deny you a service if you don't register to vote, and we're not going to test you or something with a quiz. But somehow we have to let our constituents know about these issues so that they are ready to make a decision, should we ask them to, about the next time a fair tax amendment comes on the ballot. We can't start from below water again. We just can't do it. And I think what I'm hearing both of you say is, it's a big lift. If it's the first time your constituent hears from you, you're trying to do all that. You're trying to explain that Ken Griffin is a liar. You're trying to explain that your retirement taxes are not being taxed. You're trying to explain what a progressive tax is, that the rich pay more. I mean, that's just too much. You know what I mean? So the big lesson for me here, kids, is we need to do a little more homework. Thinking ahead. This is not the last time we're going to be discussing these issues, and it's a service that we need to render our constituents. What do you think about that, Tex?
Sorry, it took me a minute to get off mute. I mean, that's absolutely, I think, just being and holding Democrats accountable too, and making sure that, people, it's not just politics as usual, but that they're delivering on their promise, to deliver effective governance and make people feel like they're getting what they're paying for, and so I think it's a failure. I think it's kind of seeing beyond the partisanship and really educating people about like what are your taxes for, who pays them, how is it being distributed, and just like, kind of make people see that, because they really have these visceral, especially in Illinois, it's just like people have really strong feelings here about like corruption and taxes and the inefficiency of government. And that's like and they're not wrong, and yeah.
That's right. Well, that's true. And again, this is not necessarily the job of nonprofit executives. This is back to the job of, I'm not sure whose job it is, to tell the story of government, that it does work for people. And yes, Madigan is corrupt and may go to prison along with many other politicians. And that is a sad thing in Illinois. And it does hurt our cause. It absolutely does hurt our cause. So we have to also try to remind people that by and large, government is actually working for us. A lot of stuff that happens every day is from government. And when I call myself a public defender, that's what I mean. I always talk about public stuff every time I make a lecture. Anytime I greet the public, I always say, I am a public defender. And there's a moment of going like, what is that? You don't look like a lawyer. Oh, I get it. He's talking about the public. Anyway, I agree. Phil, you're muted.
Are you on mute, Philip?
Yeah, Phil, you got to unmute yourself. There you
I was
go.
saying part of the education process is like the basic education of how did these things came to be? What did they respond to? Like, why do we have everyone doesn't like unions apparently anymore, but why do we have them? Why do we have child labor laws? There's a context for it that over the years, generations forget, so that these positions that are really long established in American society as progressive are now considered fringe, just because we don't control that dialogue.
Well, I think we've raised so many great issues with this discussion. I hope those on the call found this relevant and useful. I want to thank Tex for taking the time to share.
Thank you, Tex. That was awesome.
Thank you, everyone.
We're gonna move on, and Tex, you can stay with us, or you can have leave the call. But we want to thank you again so much.
Absolutely, thank you.
Okay, I'm going back to our shared screen here.
That was really awesome. It's really great to be able to talk to somebody who's been in the trenches and could give you the kind of the insider view on it. So I really appreciate what he did there.
Okay, can you see my the slide back again?
Yes.
Okay, cool. All right, so now we saw how one election that was run in Illinois did not work out for us. The failure of the Fair Tax Amendment to pass is a tragedy to all social justice champions in Illinois. It is a generational opportunity that would have changed the game, not just for the Illinois Access to Justice Coalition, but for the entire way service and justice is administered in this state, from child welfare to prisons to healthcare and public parks and every other aspect of government, all the way down to your sewer system. I hope that we get a chance to get it right. Let's talk about how to win elections in Illinois. Right here, you see the results of two recent governor elections back in 10 and 14. And you can see that the margin of victory for these candidates was not that great. And in fact, in the case of 2010, it was very small. All right, keeping that in mind, let's ask ourselves, how many of us are there in Illinois? What I mean by us, I mean nonprofit workers. Well, the answer is over 500,000. And these numbers are a little old. That's to say over 500,000 workers that do what kind of the things that we do on this call that work in Illinois. But wait, there's more. If you add us together, look at that, the margin of victory from those last two governor's races. So that's pretty interesting. But if you add in the number of people who work in education, that is to say our teachers in the public schools and in the colleges, you get another almost 400,000 people. So if you put the nonprofit workers, over 500,000, and the Illinois education workers, and you put them together, you get 903,000 allies. That is a huge number, my friends. Now, are all of them going to vote with us on the fair tax campaign or other pieces of progressive legislation? Probably not. But what if 75% of them did? Would that have made a difference in this campaign? And would it make a difference going forward? You bet it would. Now, if that's the case in Illinois, how big a deal is the nonprofit sector in America? The answer is almost 13 million people work in our sector. And when you consider the margin of victory in the presidential races, which is again in the few millions, could a unified nonprofit sector in America decide the outcome of future presidential races? So with that, we open it up to questions and comments.
Yes. Any questions about what you've heard? Just let us know if this is exciting, because it excites me, the potential to know that we're not powerless and our communities aren't powerless. In fact, we may control the winning margins for the agendas that support our work and support our communities. So Tom, we're in the last 6 minutes. We want to respect everyone's time. So we're gonna ask you, before you get off this call, to please fill out the evaluation. You could do it even while it just takes a few minutes, and it will really help us again in designing and delivering subsequent programs to you. Your feedback is very important to us. So I'm putting the link in. That's the link to the oh, that's the wrong link. Can you put the link to the SurveyMonkey link in there, Tom? Here, let's put that in there so that you can
Yeah,
fill
it's
out.
there. It's in.
Okay, great. But that's really important for us to, again, do that. Our next session will be votes, candidates, and movements. So please register for that. That's on the 14th of this month, April, from 9 to 11. And that's where we put all these together and really dive more into those 5 M's and really put some meat on this bones. And I think there, again, there's going to be a lot of really concrete information that can help us all individually as organizations and people, but also our community and our society at large. So,
And we have a special guest star. Will be visited by State Representative Damara Avalar.
Awesome.
D. Avalar, representing the 85th District. So she'll be joining us to explain why she ran for office, coming as she does from our community. And how does that impact her as a legislator, as someone who's now serving the people? She's made that circuit. Remember the Wellstone circuit? She started down in that blue, went up to the red, and then crossed over to the green, where she's now in the House. She is a person who is writing the law and writing the budgets. So we'll hear from her firsthand.